I think there's two people that have been cornered. President Putin, and he's the most important one to have pushed into a corner. And we have to be careful. There's an old saying in English where if you push a rat into a corner and you keep poking it, it is very dangerous indeed. So we have to watch that. But the other person who's been cornered, not maneuvered here, is Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump's view on who he's going to support has been unpredictable. We had that shocking incident in the Oval Office where J.D. Vance, the American vice president, ambushed President Zelensky, and then Donald Trump continued that attack on him. But then we had the reconciliation at the Pope's funeral in the Vatican, and that iconic photograph of Donald Trump and President Zelensky, heads bowed, head to head, sitting on chairs, talking to each other, which seemed to change Donald Trump's mind. But that needed to be reinforced, and this is where I think the visit by the European leaders, as well as the virtual meeting with the Coalition of the Willing, and then the phone call to Donald Trump, has pushed Trump into a corner where Putin's actions, he has just done nothing but embarrass Trump, and I don't think he knows where to turn.
And also Vladimir Putin has sent this low-level delegation to Istanbul to conduct negotiations with Ukrainians and European allies and also the American colleagues. Do you see this as a personal message to Donald Trump?
I think it's a misreading of the whole situation, because even if Donald Trump wasn't going to be there, and I know he said he might turn up, the delegation that they sent in did not match the US delegation that was there anyway, because we had Marcus Rubio, the Secretary of State, we had General Kellogg, the liaison to Ukraine, and we had Steve Witkoff, who had been into Moscow and sat down with Vladimir Putin at least 3 times. And that is a very, very senior US delegation sitting there observing what is going on. Then President Zelensky turns up and proves that he's there with his senior delegation waiting, and the Russians send a bunch of people who've got no authority to do anything. And I think they've miscalculated in a very serious way. I hope that we get clarification as to what Donald Trump is going to do next. But I think equally importantly, after the visit of Merz, Tusk, Starmer and Macron to Kyiv, that started all of this, we need them to step up now, and in particular the new German Chancellor Herz, to in effect recognize that nothing that they had suggested Putin needs to do has happened, and therefore to make a very, very bold statement saying as to what level of support they're going to give Ukraine militarily as well as in further sanctions.
Don't you think that Donald Trump can turn against Vladimir Putin only after his meeting with Vladimir Putin, which could be failed? Only in that case, if this personal meeting is failed and no results would be achieved by both sides.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump will try that. I think he'll use that as a tactic, but I would expect him to put some subtle messaging out, subtly threatening Vladimir Putin that if he doesn't come to the peace negotiation table, then the Americans will take their gloves off and will back Ukraine and the rest of the international community in a much stronger way. We haven't heard that messaging yet, but then Donald Trump has had a very busy visit to the Middle East. He's just got back to the United States. He tends to spend his weekends playing golf. So whether he'll make a statement before he goes off to play golf or whether he'll wait until Monday, only Donald Trump knows.
And has Donald Trump called Vladimir Putin's bluff after these negotiations in Istanbul, from your perspective?
I don't think Donald Trump has at the moment. I think Donald Trump and his team are embarrassed, and therefore I think he will be waiting to sit down with the team and really work out with them what his next maneuver should be, because he recognizes that this is a very dangerous situation. If he comes down on the side of Ukraine and backs them completely, then he has made a very clear statement to Russia, and he's going to have to continue to do that for the rest of his presidency. Interestingly, I've just seen on social media before we started to record this, Donald Trump saying in the making a statement to say that the next 2 or 3 weeks, something to do with improving global security will come out. Whether that relates to Ukraine, or whether that relates to the Middle East, or whether that relates to China, or whether that relates to India, Pakistan, he didn't say. But it's interesting that he's still trying to get peace deals, which is a good thing. But I think he's doing a lot of that from his own personal perspective because he's still got his eyes on the Nobel Peace Prize.
And also, do you feel that Vladimir Putin would be able to tap Trump along for a long time, for the next weeks?
I think Putin will try and keep Trump on a one-to-one negotiating basis as long as he possibly can. We have to remember that no matter what we think of Putin and his tactics and all the rest of it, he and the Russians are masters at manipulation. And Donald Trump's team are very junior and therefore, I would suggest, very naive when it comes to being manipulated. We just have to look at Steve Witkoff's behavior in the Kremlin in Moscow when he visits Putin. The optics are not good, and it's showing a level of diplomatic naivety. And I don't think there's any real strength, including with Marco Rubio or others in Donald Trump's top team. Putin, Lavrov, Peskov, the whole of the Russian top team are masters at this, and I don't think Trump's team can see it. At some stage, Donald Trump will realize he is being played and get very embarrassed, and that can only be a good thing for Ukraine.
And how do you see his next options if he finally understands that he's been embarrassed by Vladimir Putin? Do we speak only about economic sanctions, or do you have any kind of hope that military debate will also come to the White House finally?
I do hope that when Donald Trump realizes that he's being played by Vladimir Putin and being deliberately embarrassed by him, that will see the military supplies increase dramatically for Ukraine. That would be Donald Trump sending a message. I think Donald Trump's got 3 things that he can do. The first is increase the military support to Ukraine and make it unambiguous that he's going to continue that support until Russia comes to the peace table. The second thing he can do is help European efforts and other international efforts to stop Russia's shadow fleet of oil tankers and other activities around the world. And the third thing that I think he can do is in the sanctions department, but not just increasing the sanctions against Russia, but increasing, but starting sanctions against companies and countries that are accepting Russian goods, Russian oil, Russian gas, like the Indian companies that are doing it, like Chinese companies, and companies that are supplying Russia with material that can be used for military purposes, like many of the Chinese companies are. So Donald Trump's got 3 things that could really, really hurt Russia, and let's hope he starts to play them.
Let's also cover Russia and Vladimir Putin. Do you feel that Putin would like to have a ceasefire deal until the end of this year? And what do the people around him think about this initiative?
I think Putin would like there to be a ceasefire on his, but purely on his terms. He needs time to rest. He needs time to rebuild his military. He needs time to get more people to the front line. He needs time to get more equipment to the front line and build up his ammunition stocks and supplies. And therefore, he'd want to do that. But he'd want to do that if he knew that Ukraine wasn't doing exactly the same. Because I don't think Putin wants an end to the war where the front lines are frozen at the moment. He still, I think, is under the impression that he can capture the whole of Ukraine and cause a fall of the Ukrainian government very naively. And what that says to me is that those that are advising him, his inner circle, are continuing to support him. They're continuing to feed him those lines. And I've spoken to a number of people over the last couple of weeks who know Putin an awful lot better than I do, and know those that are closest to him, and they're firmly of the mind that Putin is the decision maker. No one else wants to speak out against Putin for fear of falling out of favor, and if you fall out of favor, you tend to fall out of a ninth floor window as well. And therefore, they will continue to support Putin in everything that's going on. So there isn't that a groundswell of opposition to anything that Putin's doing. I think a lot of the oligarchs would like to get back to normal business so that they continue to make as much illegal money as possible, and could restart their Western-based extravaganza lifestyles. But they know that that's not going to happen until Vladimir Putin is happy that the war finishes, and in Putin's eyes, that's only with the defeat of Ukraine, which I don't think will ever happen.
From your perspective, for how long Putin can continue his war without a ceasefire, without this time to rest and regroup his troops?
Yeah. Well, I think Putin's very tired at the moment. His troops are tired. Politically, he's tired, but the people aren't tired yet, because the real impact hasn't hit the Muscovites or those in St. Petersburg. It's still all the Russians from the very small areas, the very poor areas of Russia that are being most hit by this. But I think as we come to the end of 2025, as we go through 2026, the economic impact will start to hit European Russians, and that will cause them to question even more. The continued actions of the Ukrainians by attacking Russian infrastructure inside Russia, oil infrastructure, into military targets inside cities, military manufacturing capabilities, where airports are closed down, where you've got threats to different parades and things that are going on, will bring greater attention to the Russian people. But also, I think Russia is running out of the military equipment that it had in storage, that it's been refurbishing to get to the front line. And we're seeing it now relying more on equipment coming from North Korea. And it's relying on 80% of its ammunition coming from North Korea. And we're hearing deals being done with Iran to get more ballistic missiles and other capabilities from Iran, not just the Shahad drones. And this suggests to me that Vladimir Putin is in a very difficult position. If those supply chains can be interrupted in any way through further international sanctions or international actions, then Putin is in a very difficult position. And I think that is going to come naturally early to mid to potentially late 2026. But through 2026, I think that's when Vladimir Putin is going to hit what we describe in military terms as his culminating point. He is not going to be able to do anything else. And that's when, if Ukraine can continue to grow its military manufacturing capability and can continue to sustain its operations, then we can see much greater advances and changes in the wider battle space. And I include battle space as not just the front line in the east, but with what's going on in Russia and elsewhere.
I have also discussed this next topic with many guests about the Putin's position and his hopeless situation. Don't you think that he is in really hopeless situation? Because if he accepts ceasefire deal on appropriate for Ukraine terms, then he could face pressure from Russian hardliners, generals, FSB services. But if he doesn't accept ceasefire deal from Ukrainian and European allies, then the war would continue and he will face pressure from his own people, because problems with economy, problems with human resources will only increase.
You are 100% right. He is in a very difficult position. He is unlikely to survive if he continues the war, because the pressure will come in. He's unlikely to survive if he stops the war, and it's not just if he stops the war where he can declare some form of victory. If he then has to start to reduce those that are in the military and let them go back into their their normal civilian lives again. A, the stories of what is happening in the front line and everything else will get out. But B, he's sending an awful lot of soldiers who are trained in violence, who have been in violent situations, who will have increased mental illnesses back into communities where he can't even provide the basic medical support for those that are wounded at the moment. And that will cause greater disruption around Moscow with criminality and an awful lot more that will bring what's happened to the attention of the people. So Putin, I think, for him to survive, the war needs to continue, but it needs to continue on his terms. And this is where I think what President Zelensky has done at the moment in backing Putin into a corner with help from the European and coalition of the leaders' support, I think is masterful. The next moves have to be very careful because, as I said earlier, once you backed a rat into a corner, if you keep poking it in a way and don't give it an escape route, or you don't kill it quickly, then it can become very dangerous indeed. So we live in interesting and increasingly dangerous times, I think.
Also, you just mentioned about the Russian veterans who could also increase pressure on Kremlin. German newspaper Bild reported that Russian veterans would be the #1 concern for Russian government in case of any kind of a ceasefire, because they could, for example, also to repeat this so-called Prigozhin-style march on Moscow if there would be another leader to resist Vladimir Putin's regime. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I'd agree with Bild's analysis on that. The other thing is, from an economic perspective, if the veterans go back, Putin and the Russian government are going to have to start paying them what they had promised, paying them their pensions, paying them their medical bills, paying them the families that have lost individuals, putting them through education. All of the promises that had been given by the Russian state to get people to sign up to join, all of a sudden will come back to affect the Russian economy. So this adds to the real pressure that there is on Vladimir Putin. And I think to a degree he can see that, but he still is of a mind where he believes he can win militarily. And therefore, it's not a factor that is occupying his mind hugely at the moment. It's only when he gets that realization that he can't win, and I don't know what's going to trigger that, but it's not far off. I think that realization will start to come in, I would hope, later this year, but certainly by mid to end of 2026.
Let's cover also situation on the ground and the battlefield situation right now. According to CNN, Russia is still trying to generate a big force to conduct another full-scale offensive on the east of Ukraine or on other areas on the front lines. And also, according to the CNN, this offensive could begin as early as this summer. What is your reaction to this?
I haven't seen the detail behind it, and I've been trying to read into it and find the detail. I don't think the Russians have got the ability to generate a large force. If they had, they'd have done it already. They may bring in a formed North Korean force or capability like that. That would be an interesting move to bring it in. But the Russians so far have not shown the tactical ability to bring a large force together to have a military effect on the front line. And because of their losses, they will be losing and have lost most of their people with the sort of military experience to do that and to be able to operate it. And the other thing that is coming in is the nature of the front line has changed. The drone technology that is operating over the front line, and especially the developments in drone technology, where we've now gone from radio-controlled drones to fiber optic controlled drones that are very difficult to jam, and the advances that Ukrainians have done in particular with their technology has changed that front line, where you'd ordinarily get contact between troops that would be measured over a few hundred meters in depth. that is now measured in depths of kilometers, 5, 7, 10 kilometers. You can have tactical battles. So even if there's a large formation, the threat that there is to that formation as it moves up to Ukrainian defensive positions can start from a very close tactical perspective, up to 10 kilometers or more away. And that's without using sophisticated long-range Western and other missiles and weapons to interdict it. So I'm trying to find the detail that CNN has used to get that, apart from the fact that every year there's the summer offensive when the ground is right for an armored formation to come in. So from a theoretical perspective, it could happen. From a practical perspective, I don't think it's going to happen in the way that their headlines are suggesting.
And don't you think that the Ukrainian armed forces have already stabilized the front lines and its defense against the Russian forces?
Yeah, I think the Ukrainian forces have done a fantastic job in stabilizing the front lines. Even if they're losing, a few hundred meters here or a kilometer there, given what they've managed to achieve over the last 3 years, in holding back what was on paper the second largest military capability in the world by making sure that the Russians can't create local air superiority over the battlefield, by developing new technologies that has turned that the contact line at the edge of the front line from being the range of direct fire weapons, whether those be tank guns or armored personnel guns or machine guns or personal weapons of the soldiers. They've extended that out to 5, 7, 10 or more kilometers through the use of FPV drones in particular. So I think Ukraine has rewritten the tactics manual as to how you stabilize and sustain a defensive position. And the next step is to turn that into something that you can then exploit from an offensive capability to push the enemy back.
Do you still believe that Ukraine has enough capabilities and human power to conduct a counteroffensive on the battlefield?
I think Ukraine has, not across the whole of the front line, but in specific areas that can dislocate the Russians. We saw that with the Ukrainian incursion into the Kursk region. There's nothing to stop a similar incursion somewhere else, causing the Russians to be dislocated again and giving an opportunity to break through. I don't think that the Ukrainians are going to be able to generate, without a huge amount more support from the West, enough of a tactical capability to break through the Russians and to physically push them back across the whole of the front line, including from Ukraine. But I think a number of smaller operations in different areas could dislocate the Russians to a point where potentially their defenses could collapse and they would feel as if they have to move back, in the same way that we saw down in Kherson, whenever Ukraine managed to back the Russians up against the Dnipro, and the Russians had to make the decision to withdraw across to the other side of the river rather than get lost. So that is a possibility at some stage in the future. But the war is going to be won at the operational level. The war is going to be won with the activities that Ukraine is carrying out to stop the Russians being able to continue to prosecute their tactical battles. So this is, as we talked about before we came on air, this is the operations that are being controlled by General Budanov and his wider team that are helping him in attacking Russia's oil infrastructure, its ability to continue to fund its war, attacking its military factories, its ability to continue to manufacture capability, attacking Russian generals inside Moscow, creating panic amongst the higher level command and control and nervousness about Ukraine's freedom of maneuver, attacking military airfields deep inside Russia, making those very vulnerable, and reducing Russia's strategic air capability, attacking the Black Sea fleet to a point where it has become virtually inoperable in the Black Sea. All of these tactics are the tactics that will force Putin to the negotiating table and will create the conditions, I think, for Ukraine to win.
Thank you, Colonel Ingram, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much, and indeed, Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Thank you very much.
Thank you.